Algeria, a vast and beautiful land in North Africa, is a country of striking contrasts. From the golden sands of the Sahara Desert to the lush green mountains of the north, its landscapes are as diverse as its history is rich. This land has been a crossroads of civilizations for millennia, a place where cultures have met, clashed, and blended. Algeria had a long and rich history, with ancient cities that were once bustling centers of trade and culture. The ruins of these cities still stand today, silent witnesses to a glorious past. However, in the 19th century, France took control of Algeria. The French invasion in 1830 marked the beginning of a new and tumultuous chapter in Algerian history. The French made it part of their empire in 1830, establishing a colonial regime that would last for over a century. This period was characterized by significant changes and challenges for the Algerian people. For over a century, France ruled Algeria with an iron fist. The colonial administration imposed its own laws, culture, and economic systems, often at the expense of the local population. Many French people moved to Algeria, attracted by the promise of new opportunities and fertile land. These settlers established communities that were often isolated from the native Algerian population. They took over the best land and businesses, creating a stark divide between the colonizers and the colonized. The economic benefits of the colony were largely enjoyed by the French, while the Algerians were left to struggle. Algerians became second-class citizens in their own country. They were subjected to discriminatory laws and practices that limited their rights and opportunities. They had fewer rights and opportunities, facing systemic discrimination in all aspects of life. Education, employment, and political participation were all areas where Algerians were marginalized. Life was often very hard for them. Many Algerians lived in poverty, struggling to make ends meet under a regime that prioritized the needs of the settlers over those of the native population. This injustice was felt deeply by the Algerian people. Over time, resentment and anger began to build, leading to acts of resistance and protest against the colonial authorities. They yearned for freedom and the right to govern their own land. The desire for independence grew stronger with each passing year, as more and more Algerians joined the nationalist movement. The seeds of resentment towards French rule were sown, slowly but surely growing into a desire for change. Secret meetings and underground movements began to take shape, laying the groundwork for a future struggle. The situation was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Tensions were high, and it was clear that something had to give. The Algerian people were ready to fight for their rights and their future. That spark would come in the middle of the 20th century, igniting a struggle for independence that would change Algeria forever. The Algerian War of Independence was a brutal and bloody conflict, but it ultimately led to the birth of a new nation, free from colonial rule. Life under French rule was unfair for most Algerians. They were treated poorly compared to the French. Algerians had limited access to education and jobs. They were denied basic rights that the French enjoyed. This inequality caused growing anger and frustration. Algerian nationalism grew stronger. More and more Algerians wanted freedom. They wanted to rule their own country. They formed groups to fight for independence. One of these was the National Liberation Front, or FLN. The FLN decided to start a war against the French. They believed that violence was the only way to achieve independence. They wanted to force France to leave Algeria. In 1954, the FLN launched a series of attacks. This marked the beginning of the Algerian War of Independence. A long and bloody struggle lay ahead. The Algerian War began on November 1, 1954. It was a pivotal moment in the history of Algeria, marking the start of a long and brutal struggle for independence from French colonial rule. The war was initiated by the National Liberation Front, or FLN, a revolutionary group determined to free Algeria from decades of French domination. The FLN launched a series of coordinated attacks across Algeria. These attacks were meticulously planned and executed, targeting key locations to maximize their impact and send a clear message to the French authorities. They targeted French military installations and government buildings, aiming to disrupt the colonial administration and weaken the French military presence in Algeria. These attacks were a surprise to the French. The sudden and widespread nature of the uprising caught the French authorities off guard, leaving them scrambling to respond. They did not expect such a widespread uprising. The French had underestimated the level of discontent and the determination of the Algerian people to fight for their freedom. The French were initially caught off guard. The scale and intensity of the FLN's attacks forced the French military to quickly mobilize and respond to the growing threat. However, they responded quickly and brutally. The French government was determined to crush the rebellion and maintain control over Algeria, deploying significant military resources to the region. They sent thousands of troops to Algeria. The French military presence in Algeria was significantly increased, with reinforcements arriving to bolster the existing forces. They imposed harsh measures to crush the rebellion. Curfews were enforced and raids were conducted to root out FLN fighters and their supporters. They arrested thousands of Algerians suspected of supporting the FLN. The French authorities used mass arrests and detentions as a tactic to intimidate and suppress the Algerian population. Despite the French response, the rebellion spread like wildfire. The FLN's message resonated with many Algerians, leading to a surge in support for the independence movement. More and more Algerians joined the FLN. The ranks of the FLN swelled as ordinary citizens took up arms to fight for their country's freedom. They were determined to fight for their freedom no matter the cost. The resolve of the Algerian fighters was unshakable, and they were prepared to make any sacrifice necessary to achieve their goal. The war quickly escalated into a bitter and bloody conflict. The violence and brutality of the war left deep scars on both sides, with countless lives lost and communities torn apart. The early days of the war were marked by guerrilla warfare. The FLN used their knowledge of the local terrain to their advantage, employing hit-and-run tactics to harass and weaken the French forces. The FLN, with the support of many ordinary Algerians, used hit-and-run tactics against the better-equipped French forces. This strategy allowed them to inflict significant damage while minimizing their own losses, keeping the French forces constantly on edge and unable to secure a decisive victory. The Algerian War was a struggle between two sides with contrasting visions for the future of Algeria. This conflict, which lasted from 1954 to 1962, was not just a battle for territory, but a profound clash of ideologies and aspirations. The war was marked by intense violence, political maneuvering, and a deep-seated desire for self-determination among the Algerian people. On one side was the FLN, the National Liberation Front, led by charismatic figures like Ahmed Ben Bella and Houari Boumediene. These leaders were not just political figures, they were symbols of hope and resilience for many Algerians. They envisioned an independent Algeria, free from the shackles of French colonial rule, and were willing to make immense sacrifices to achieve this dream. These leaders rallied the Algerian people to the cause of independence, inspiring them with promises of a brighter future free from colonial rule. Their speeches and actions galvanized a nation, bringing together people from diverse backgrounds to fight for a common cause. The FLN's message resonated deeply, igniting a fervor that spread like wildfire across Algeria. On the other side were the French, represented by figures like Jacques Soustelle and Charles de Gaulle. The French government was determined to maintain its hold on Algeria, viewing it as an integral part of France. Soustelle, initially a staunch advocate for French Algeria, found himself increasingly at odds with de Gaulle's shifting stance on the conflict. Soustelle, initially a staunch advocate for French Algeria, found himself increasingly at odds with de Gaulle's shifting stance on the conflict. As the war dragged on, the political landscape in France began to change. De Gaulle, a complex figure, recognized the strength of Algerian nationalism but struggled to find a solution that would satisfy both the French settlers in Algeria and the demands for independence. De Gaulle, a complex figure, recognized the strength of Algerian nationalism but struggled to find a solution that would satisfy both the French settlers in Algeria and the demands for independence. His attempts to navigate this delicate balance often led to tensions within the French government and among the settlers, who felt increasingly alienated by his policies. The war also produced its share of martyrs, individuals whose deaths became rallying cries for their respective sides. These martyrs were not just casualties of war, they were symbols of the struggle and the ultimate price of freedom. Their sacrifices were remembered and honored by their communities, fueling the resolve to continue the fight. For the Algerians, figures like Larbi Ben Mehidi, tortured and killed by the French, became symbols of sacrifice and resistance. Ben Mehidi's bravery and ultimate sacrifice were emblematic of the broader struggle for independence. His story, like many others, was a testament to the resilience and determination of the Algerian people. Their deaths fueled the flames of Algerian nationalism, strengthening the resolve of the FLN and its supporters. The memory of these martyrs served as a powerful motivator, reminding the living of the cost of freedom and the importance of their cause. The rallies and protests that followed were not just political acts but deeply emotional responses to the sacrifices made by their compatriots. The human cost of the war was immense, with countless innocent lives lost in the crossfire. The destruction wrought by the conflict left deep scars on the landscape and the people. Families were torn apart, communities were destroyed, and the trauma of the war lingered long after the fighting had stopped. These individual stories of courage, sacrifice, and loss serve as poignant reminders of the brutal realities of war and its enduring impact on both individuals and nations. The legacy of the Algerian War is a complex tapestry of heroism and tragedy, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for both resilience and suffering. As we remember these leaders and martyrs, we honor their contributions and reflect on the profound lessons their stories impart.